Well, good morning, people. It's I hope we'll be able to see more people here after coffee hour after they talk for a little bit there. Today, Leah Bolger is back to talk to us about a wide variety of things. In a way, she has a lot of information, and I hope at the end, I haven't told Leah this yet, but that she will speak to the Afghanistan situation now if she can. I'll say that the most important thing that I would like the community, this military community, to understand sometimes is there's a lot of different ways to deal with conflict instead of wars. And Leah's founding, the organization of which she was a founding member is called World Beyond War. And that's really their meaning. What they're trying to do is tell people and teach people as a teaching organization that there is a whole world beyond wars, and we do not have to do wars. About Leah herself, and by the way, I have to apologize for this really horrible title. I made that up, and also I have to apologize for the way that the announcements went out. So with those two things said. But Leah retired in the year 2000 from the US Navy at the rank of commander. And that was after 20 years of active service. And she had served in multiple areas around the world prior to that. She was also a Navy military fellow at the MIT Security Studies program. I'd like to know more about that, Leah, later. And how many get to do it, and how do you get to be accepted for that? She got also a MA in National Security and Strategy from the Naval War College. And is that in Annapolis or?
No, it's in Newport, Rhode Island.
Newport, Rhode Island. And then what do you have to do to be, who teaches there, and what do you have to do to be accepted there?
At the Naval War College?
Yeah.
Well, Naval War College is sort of a must-have for any officer who's to become an 05 or commander, the rank I retired at. You have to go through the Naval War College, and it's a service college. It's the only one of the military services that has an accredited program. So we actually get a master's degree from that, but it's just something that's required of anybody who's going to try to get, if you're going to try to move up, you have to go there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I am familiar with the Carlisle Army War College.
That's right.
And I thought they could get degrees from there also.
No.
But I know they have very fine teachers that are not connected to the military, that are connected with maybe CIA, maybe the State Department and all that, and history teachers. So I presume it's the same there. After retirement, she became active in Veterans for Peace, which I think are active right now. And she was the first woman national president. She also met with victims of US drone strikes, and this is what really led to this program today, and subsequently created the Drones Quilt Project. I'd like to know more about that later. So currently she serves as the president of the board of directors of World Beyond War. Is that still true? Are you still?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Thank you very much for Leah for talking to us today.
Sure, my pleasure. All right, shall I go ahead and get started then?
Yes, you can.
I'll share my screen and make sure, see if this works. All right, so Jill mentioned a few things. I graduated from the University of Central Missouri State University in 1978 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in studio art, drawing and painting, and quickly found out that there are not very many jobs for people with that kind of degree. And so I joined, it's kind of a long story how I ended up going to the Navy, but anyway, I did. And then I was commissioned in 1980. I had 4 overseas tours: Iceland, Bermuda, Japan, and Tunisia. I worked mostly in anti-submarine warfare. That's what ASW stands for. Administration, personnel, foreign military sales is what FMS for. Fellowship, I was a military fellow at MIT. There were 18 people selected every year from the Navy. Each of those services provides military fellows to different think tanks and universities. And so I was lucky enough to be selected for the Navy Military Fellow at MIT one time, and that was a wonderful tour. Retired in 2000. My husband and I was also a Navy commander, and we met on our final tour, and we had a joint retirement ceremony. And we moved to Corvallis in 2004. After we traveled a good bit, we bought a sailboat, sold everything we owned, and lived on a sailboat for a couple of years. And then we sold the sailboat and lived on a little 24-foot RV for a couple of years, and we ended up here, and we've been here ever since, and we really like it down here in Corvallis. So everybody asks me, yeah, that's right. Everybody always asks me, how did you turn from a warrior to a peacenik? And I was never a warrior. I joined the Navy because I needed a job, as do most people who join the military. But what really did transform me into being an activist is this AFSC, the American Friends Service Committee, had an exhibit called Eyes Wide Open that's traveled all over the country, and you may have seen it, I don't know. But it consisted of these boots lined up like this. And then around the edge of the exhibit, they had civilian shoes to represent the Iraqis that had been killed. And they had a pair of army boots for every soldier who had been killed. And then you can see attached to the boots were little mementos and pictures, things like that. Well, I saw this exhibit down in Eugene, Oregon, and it just hit me like I had a visceral reaction to it. I just felt like something had hit me in the stomach, and I was just sobbing. It really, really upset me and motivated me to get involved. And that's where I really started getting active after that. So there are lots of civilian uses for drones that are perfectly fine and not that worrisome. And we're not, World Beyond War doesn't advocate that we get rid of all drones, although there are some problems with these civilian drones as well. They crash. There's a lot of talk about Fourth Amendment violations. Is it okay for your neighbor to put a drone in your backyard or up to your window? Where do we draw the line on that? Or the police or anybody? Where's the privacy? And do they have to have a warrant to use that? Air traffic control, there are no rules and regulations whatsoever, and this could be a really big problem. No, requirement for training like you would a pilot's license or a driver's license. So this isn't new. People using aerial means is not new to combat. Balloons were used in, I wrote it down here, 1849, the Austrian Navy used it to capture Vienna via a balloon, and it's been used for a long time for ISR, which is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So this is the main platform that the United States military used, the MQ-9 Reaper. You can see the statistics about it. In 2006, was 15 years ago or so, the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, at the time, General Michael Mosley, said, quote, "We've moved from using UAVs primarily in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance roles before Operation Iraqi Freedom to a true hunter-killer role with the Reaper." And that's how it's used now, the Reaper, that it has, you can carry bombs on it. And if you look here, the payload that it can carry, a Hellfire missile the purpose of a Hellfire missile is, quote, "high explosive anti-tank blast fragmentation." The Sidewinder, supersonic heat-seeking air-to-air missile, which is designed for fighter jets to fight each other in the air. And the Navy uses them for fleet air defense to shoot down aircraft. And so can you imagine using a 500-pound bomb or a Hellfire missile to attack a person? And this is what they're doing. You can imagine the damage that's done in addition to killing the person that they're trying to get. It's really unconscionable. So you probably have seen something like this. This is a kind of a little graphic depiction of the drones that are controlled from the States. Creech is a major base, and Creech and Hanford, oh gosh, what's the one in New York? Hanford, I think. Anyway, Creech is a major one, but there are others. So it works. The planes, the drones themselves are located in one of the dozens and dozens of drone bases we have around the world, usually near the area that we want to attack. And so they communicate via satellite. And on the right, you can see the two quote crew members, and you can see they're wearing their flight suits, and they command the aircraft, and they have TV screens that show them to assess whether the target is legitimate or not. So I wrote this slide up several years ago, and they're everywhere. I mean, they're everywhere. And so this list is always changing. We add them, we add bases all the time. And there's really no sign that they were going to do anything else except can increase the use. We first used them against Al-Qaeda in 2012. Under Bush, they started ramping up, and then Obama, they just went berserk under him. He also had allowed the CIA to launch their own drones without any kind of accountability, with no kind of record keeping that people could look at and see all the places that the CIA had dropped Hellfire missiles or bombs. And it just during Obama's reign that this thing called signature strikes became a thing. A signature strike was, it said that the people are targeted because their activities are believed to fit a particular behavioral profile through their individual identities, or though their individual identities are unknown. So they don't know who they are. They don't know who they are. But if they were, and the criteria was a military-aged male with a weapon. And that would be justification to kill them with a Hellfire missile, a military-aged male with a weapon. And you can understand that's crazy. That's crazy to say that is a legitimate target. Guns are a huge part of the culture in this part of the world, and they're legal in the United States, as a matter of fact. In Oregon, you can walk around with the gun, and so it just to say that we should be able to kill you because you're a military-age male and weapon, even though we don't know who you are. And this shows also that the military they don't have the names, they don't have the numbers of how many people they've killed, and the numbers and the names that we have are a result of research done by outside agencies not belonging to the United States. So Obama, and then I think what I was read is that the CIA stopped, they were no longer allowed to do their own launches, but I seriously doubt that. I think the CIA does a lot of things that nobody knows about. Trump ramped them up even more after Obama. And Biden, it doesn't look like there are any kind of signs that he's going to lessen the use. In fact, I mean, now the term is over the horizon, meaning drones, meaning we don't have a ground troops in Afghanistan, but from over the horizon, and there are dozens of bases surrounding where we want to attack people. So that's the latest description of drone use, over the horizon.
Can I ask a question here?
Certainly.
You showed those people, the two pilots with their little screens, and I was surprised at how clear it was. They can see people at that, they can see people. But it seems like always people are accompanied by another person. So so there's a man with a gun and the lady's next to him. Do they kill him anyway?
Well, I mean, this is the big discussion, and there are movies about this a depiction of the crew just trying to decide whether it was okay or not. They claim that they do not kill, they don't drop a missile or a bomb or whatever if there are women and children present. Supposedly they don't do that, but if there are two men there with guns, and I don't know. I just know that a lot of women and children have been killed by drones. So whether they were intended to be killed or not, or if they were just chalked up as collateral damage, we know that drones kill way more people than they were intended by the target. So the top 10 countries are on the left-hand side. These are the top 10 countries as far as projected use in the future. I just read this in a recent article, so it kind of surprised me, some of the countries that were there. And then there are over 100 countries that have combat drones. So you can see this is just going to become a nightmare when we still have no kind of rules of engagement or any kind of laws about where you fly or how you fly them or whatever. And and then the asterisks are countries who have actually used combat drones. They've launched weapons from that platform. The others I just listed there, but there are, like I said, there's more than 100 of them. So in 2012, Code Pink organized a delegation. This is Lydia Benjamin. You may know of her, at least, if you don't know who she is. Very, very prominent anti-war activist, and founded the organization Code Pink. Here's me right here. Anyway, this delegation was, we had 30 Americans, 1 Canadian, and their ages ranged from 22 to 83. So here is a map of Afghanistan. Here's Pakistan, here's Afghanistan, Iran, India. So Islamabad is the capital of Pakistan, and this is where we landed. And this area here, right here, this is where most of the drone strikes have happened in North Waziristan and South Waziristan. This here is the city of Tunk, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So you can see these are all high mountains. The people who live here they live in tribes. They have tribe loyalty and clan loyalty. They don't have loyalty to a certain government. They don't recognize this boundary that has been artificially created by the British. So this is kind of Western regulation or whatever put onto a people who never requested and don't really have a loyalty to it. And this area that's in the purple and the orange is called a federally administered tribal area by the government of Pakistan. It's not considered necessarily a state, federally administered tribal area. So the people who sponsored our visit were primarily Shahzad Akbar. He's a lawyer. He has an organization called the Foundation for Fundamental Rights, and he was representing victims of drone strikes, trying to receive some kind of compensation or acknowledgement or some kind of accountability for these victims. And then Imran Khan, you may have recognized his face. He's currently the president of Pakistan. He founded the PTI party, which stands for Pakistan Movement for Justice, in 1996, and he's been the head of that party ever since. So Imran Khan was the coordinator for the convoy that we took down to Waziristan. So we started in Islamabad, and Shahzad invited a guest to speak with us, and then we did the convoy, and then we came back, and then we met with some other people back at back in Islamabad. So before we left, there was a Pew poll that came out that said that 75% of Pakistanis viewed the United States as an enemy country, even though we had never, declared war on Pakistan. And the reason for this is because of the drone strikes. The State Department has 4 categories of warning or whatever about going to a different country, and 4 is the most severe, where they just say do not go. 2 is be cautious, and 3 is recommended that you don't go. So we were category 3 at the time we went, and with good reason. It was a dangerous place to be for Americans. Now, at the time, the ambassador was Richard Hoagland, and he was a replacement for the ambassador, I've forgotten his name now, but who was relieved of relieved for cause, because that's when it became known that the CIA was the one that were dropping the bombs on Waziristan. And this evidently was something that the ambassador wasn't supposed to tell, or I don't know how it happened, but it was under his watch. So he took the fall for it. And Richard Hoagland was who we met with. So we presented Ambassador Hoagland with several things. We had a signature petition with over 3,000 names. We talked to him about the number of casualties. We asked him how many people had been killed by the drone strikes in Pakistan. And he told us, well, let me back up again. This Living Under Drones report was published by the University of New York University and Stanford. It was a joint report. It's available online if you want to look for that. And so the Living Under Drones report cited numbers of people killed. So we asked Ambassador Hoagland about the numbers, and he said, well, I can't tell you, it's classified. He said, but I just received a briefing this morning, and I can tell you that the numbers are in the single digits, which is absolutely crazy. It's absolutely crazy. We knew it's like hundreds at that time. So it's just BS they're giving us. We asked about what's called a double tap strike, which is illegal according to international law. And that's when one missile strikes, and then when the people come to try to see if they can help or find anybody who's still alive, then they launch another one and kill those people. And this is illegal, but it happens. We asked him about it. He denied it. He said, no, they don't do that. We asked him if any compensation had been given to the victims' families. Absolutely not, nothing whatsoever. And so we said, so if you know exactly where we're going, Ambassador Hoagland, we told you our route. So can we feel secure that you will pass that on and we won't be hit with our convoy when we're going to Waziristan? He said, yes, I can guarantee that. And I said, well, then, so if we had Americans in the area all the time, then you wouldn't, they wouldn't bomb Waziristan. And he said, well, no, we can't do that. So anyway, he denied everything we presented to him. He didn't seem interested in the least about what we were trying to do. He just said we shouldn't go and cautioned. That was his job, his mandate, I guess, to tell us, to dissuade us from going. But we were there and we were determined to go. So while we were still in Islamabad, before we went to Waziristan, we were still there, we had 3 meetings with tribal leaders and families of victims. And this is Shahzad Akbar arranged these meetings. And some of the problems that prevent people from knowing what is really happening in the areas, one, it's rural and it's very rugged terrain. As you can see, it was in the mountains, and the roads are not very good. And, transportation is a problem. Communications, they don't have cell towers all over the place. The Pakistani army is against the people. Let's see if I can explain this. The Pakistani army does not want people going into these areas because they support the drone strikes, because they say they're against the Taliban. So the Pakistani army is very restrictive and stops people from trying to go into this area. And then a lot of societal and religious customs. People are buried right away. That's part of their religion. The names of women in particular are not released because they consider that a privacy violation to release them, or pictures, that kind of thing. So there are obstacles to knowing the real truth. And what we do know is by the work and the efforts of the man holding these pictures here, and his name is Noor Behram, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about him later. So here's me holding a piece of a missile casing. It's a Hellfire missile. So the harm, of course, the deaths are horrific. And the trauma, though, we don't think about, and today, when we'll talk about Afghanistan later, we talk about the number of fatalities. Okay, that's horrible. But What about the severe injuries? Now, in Waziristan, they don't have hospitals and ambulances. They have, maybe a car that you could try to put somebody in and get them to the nearest facility. They don't have the means to take care of severe injuries. So people are going to die because of their lack of medical accessibility. The emotional trauma, can you imagine what it's like to have drones hovering? You can see them, you can hear them all the time, never knowing when it's going to drop, when a missile is going to come. So there's no compensation. So if the breadwinner is killed, there's no means for the wife and the children to feed themselves. There's no income. There's no compensation for the destruction of their homes or their livestock. Nothing. So and we don't seem to care about that, we as the United States. So when I got home, I wrote this article called Life in Waziristan 20 AD, meaning after drones. So comparing life before before drones and after drones. So the drones I mentioned, they're there all the time. And this really creates a lot of emotional distress, mental illness, to the point of depression and suicide, which is unheard of in Pashtun culture. Suicide is, but it's happening. Children are afraid to go to school. Parents won't let them go to school. People are afraid to gather in groups for weddings or funerals. Because the United States has launched attacks on groups of people. Whether, and this might answer your question, Jill, it doesn't matter if there are enough targets in the area. They'll blast it, because they'll say, well, it's a funeral, and if you're going to go to the funeral, then you must be allied with this terrorist that we just killed, even though they don't know for sure that was a terrorist in the first place. So this, and the other thing is that relocation I mentioned here, sometimes the people who live there have family members who live out in the cities, outside this area, and so they'll send their children away. So now the children are growing up without, not living in their traditional culture, living with relatives they may not know very well. They most definitely probably don't speak English, and their native tongue may not be readily prominent wherever they're sent. So there are all these little things, not so little, but all these other things that people don't think about as a result of this. So I mentioned the surgical strikes, and this is what Bush and Obama said, that these missiles are so precise, and we can tell through our drone intelligence reconnaissance exactly where we're putting the missile. Well, there are, you can tell exactly where it goes. The missiles go exactly where they tell them to, but I would call it, they call it surgical, like it's a sniper or something that kills one person and they know exactly who they're getting. It's not surgical at all. The missile goes where they intended to go, for sure. The signature strikes I mentioned about a military age male, the CIA, giving not being accountable for who they're killing. We also heard about these GPS chips that the CIA, through their contacts on the ground, could entice some people to plant these chips on their enemies. It's if there's some kind of dispute perhaps between tribes or whatever, that these chips could be used to identify your neighbor as a terrorist. And we don't know exactly how many people that happened to, but it did then just increase the suspicion and the lack of trust between neighbor to neighbor. And if, it raised tensions considerably.
Can I ask you a question here? How big an area, when one of these comes down, like how many yards would be blown up?
I don't know.
Okay, but it'd be more than a house.
Oh, yes.
Okay, it'd be maybe like a schoolyard.
I couldn't tell you the exact amount, and size, but yes, it kills. I mean, it does a lot of damage. Well, you can see here's a picture. It's not just a small area.
Mhm.
And there's lots of pictures you'll see. There's just, it's devastating what it does. So what is a militant? We hear all these euphemisms, all these synonyms, I think, as a militant, enemy, insurgent, Taliban, terrorist, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, resistor, all these people, insurgent. A resistor, this is the one I just love. Now, can you imagine in the United States, if another country were dropping bombs on us, do you think we might be resisting that? Do you think we might try to fight back? This is just how rhetoric can be used by the media to affect opinion. And the fact is, they don't know who they're killing. They don't know if they were members of Taliban. So we just say militants, or we just say that it was just the bad guys that were killed. And I've talked with some Iraq and Afghanistan vets, and they say this is kind of a black joke or whatever, that how can you tell if a dead person is an enemy, or how can you tell if a person is an enemy or not? And you say, well, is he dead? Yeah, he's an enemy. And that's what they go by. But what really surprised me is that the Pakistani media did the same thing, like the crawl under the news channels like CNN, where you see that crawl that goes across the bottom. The same thing in Pakistan would say, 12 militants, 12 extremists were killed in North Waziristan today. So they followed the same thing because they don't want to inflame the Pakistani people even more, as I said, the 75% that think we're enemy, they want to keep that down. So the Pashtun culture, this circle here, this is called a jirga, and they're all men. The men get together and they resolve their disputes through jirgas, through discussion. They don't kill each other. They do this in a civilized way. Well, we have attacked jirgas because we believe that some bad guys were there, and so this is a reason why they don't want to get together in groups anymore. So the culture is called Pashtunwali. It's its own kind of I would say government, but kind of structure of how they live. Communally, they live, several families will be in something that you would call a compound. And that's another word too that's kind of loaded, that's a terrorist compound. You hear that sound and it makes you think it's like a fort or something. It's not, it's a living quarters with an open area in the middle, and so they live communally. They're very hospitable. They will welcome you into their homes and give you everything that they have, but they're also vengeful, and no wonder. So their children, their children's children will remember what has been done by this country in perpetuity. Guns are a part of their culture. They walk around with them all the time. Women, they're very much protected their privacy, I mentioned before. Then also I mentioned at the beginning that these people don't really recognize the difference between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Pashtun people live in both areas. So our convoy, I get back to that. So this is Imran Khan wearing traditional clothing that the men wear in this area. He is wildly popular. He was a professional cricket player and won the World Cup when he was the captain of the team, and he is just revered. But he's also famous for philanthropy too. He's built schools and hospitals, and just a good guy. And that part of the platform, at this point, he was just running for president. This was a campaign visit to go to Waziristan in this convoy with cars. I mean, and there were people just lining the route as we got closer to the area. Just thousands of people just adore him. But the government didn't want him to go there, as I've described. The government didn't want him to go, and at one point the Pakistani army blocked our convoy, and we were able to get around it, but it took some doing and negotiation, but they actually blocked it. It was very dangerous for the Americans to be there, but we went anyway. There were people that were either, sworn enemies of the United States, or people who recognized that we were trying to do something to help. And those were the people on the inside that kind of took care of us and drove the buses. And we stayed overnight near the city of Tonk, in a big compound, and we were protected and treated very nicely. And then the next day, when we tried to get farther along, we got turned away, and we had to go back, while Imran Khan and the rest of his convoy were able to continue through their tour of the area. We did get a lot of press coverage. This is a picture of me holding, we wore these bibs that said, I'm against American drones, or something similar to that. And this was the year I was the president of Veterans for Peace. Now, this man, Nur Bahram, I mentioned earlier, he is the person who's taken all the photographs of the people who've been killed. And he's holding two photographs in this picture. Initially, when he went in to try to take pictures and document the evidence of this tragic situation, he was not trusted. People thought maybe he was CIA. As I mentioned, CIA are there, and there are double agents and that kind of thing. But eventually he did win their trust, and he documented with his camera the tragedy and the people who were killed. Now, he's very much suffering from PTSD himself from this, and he's in danger too by people who don't want the truth to be told. But virtually every picture you see of someone who's killed in this part of the world was taken by this man. Here are some of the pictures. The one in the upper left are three children whose parents were both killed in a drone strike, and they are holding up some rubble. That's all that was there where their house was. They're just holding up these rocks. You can see just horrible. These are children. This story, man, every time I tell this story, I get all upset about it. I can't hardly tell it without crying. This man was away from his home. I don't know what he was doing, but he was away from his home, and his wife was there, and the house or the compound or whatever where the wife was hit by a missile. And he came back, and the only thing he could find to any kind of indication that his wife had been there was this scrap of her dress that was in a fence, caught in a fence or a tree, I can't remember. And so there was nothing to prove this woman even existed, because this kind of culture, they don't have, baby books and yearbooks and all these kinds of things. So this woman's life is, it just gets me. I can't hardly tell that story, but it's tragic. So we come back to Islamabad, and we have a second meeting with Ambassador Hoagland. And we asked him, have you read that Stanford report that we left with you when we saw you first? And he said, no, he hadn't read it because it was controversial. Well, it's controversial because it pointed out the truth. But he hadn't read it. He didn't care to read it. He has still not met with any of the victims who were in Islamabad trying to talk to people. He said that the international law was not applicable in this case, that we told him that these strikes are violations of international law. You can't just attack another country. But he said, no, that's not applicable. He said, we told him, and we talked about the mental anguish of these drones overhead 24/7. And he said, no, you can't see them and you can't hear them either. It is possible a drone can fly over and you wouldn't see it or hear it if it's high enough, but it's also quite possible, as is fact, that they do fly low enough that they can be seen and heard. And this is a source of mental torture. the photos and stories that we told him, he said they were made up. They didn't believe they were true. And he's just completely indifferent, no curiosity, no questions for us about what we'd seen or who we'd talked to, just oblivious, just completely indifferent. So these are 3 quotes that he gave us when we were there, this second meeting. I firmly believe that there are no secondary strikes on legitimate first responders. So I said, well, what's a legitimate first responder? He said, well, an ambulance or something. Well, there aren't any ambulances up in these hills, these mountains. And so, this is his way of saying, well, they weren't legitimate. They were probably terrorists themselves. And so the double tap doesn't apply. We don't do that. We don't target compounds when there are women and children visible. And this is what I was mentioning earlier. Well, people live inside these homes, and that doesn't mean they're not there. They might be inside. And then we talked about the kill list, and you may have heard about this. This was reported in the New York Times that Obama had a kill list, and that every Tuesday he would authorize targeting these specific people on his kill list. So we asked him about that, and he said, "I'm very uncomfortable with that. And that's deeply offensive." But the fact that we were killing civilians, that didn't offend him at all. He didn't want to know about that. So this gentleman, Kareem Khan, we met with him. He's holding a piece of a missile casing. His son and brother were both killed. They were both educators. His home was destroyed. Everything that I mentioned, no kind of compensation or even acknowledgement or accountability to, yes, this happened. It was just, and he said to us, I think they don't consider us as human beings. And I think he's right. I don't think the government thinks of him as a human being. And in fact, when you go to boot camp, basic training, they treat you they train you, indoctrinate you to think of the enemy as inhuman, to dehumanize the enemy. And that's critical to allow a person to be able to kill someone. You have to think of them as less than human, or you can't do it. And this is why we have PTSD, because it's not normal to kill people. It causes trauma. So anyway, he doesn't think they consider us as human beings, and I agree with him. So the casualties, this was at the time that in 2012, and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which does incredible work, it's a British organization. They had something called the Naming the Dead Project, which is where the source that I used to make the drones quilts, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But these are the numbers that we had at the time, and I'm sure they're grossly undercounted. These are the ones they could actually document, but there's thousands more that there are no evidence of. The people were buried. There's no picture, nothing. So the future, U.S. is just buying more. They're becoming more stealthy and more expensive, but they're still the cheapest thing in the toolkit for the United States military. So they love them for that reason. Building more bases all the time, allocating more money for them, more use, selling them. Of course, if there's money to be made, we will sell it to anybody. Increased use by other countries and also by non-state actors. Now, see, they'll say, well, that's not fair that, Taliban can't use drones. We'll have to shoot those down because only states can have them. Only we can have them. Only people with uniforms can have them, because any other kinds of deaths are terrorism. But if you have a uniform on, then it's just, it's just combat. It's what's, sanctioned. So the Drone School Project, when I came home, I wanted to do something to recognize these people who'd been killed. And I think you probably heard of the AIDS quilt, where there were different blocks representing people. So it was kind of an idea, a cross between the AIDS quilt and the Eyes Wide Open exhibit that I mentioned at the beginning with the boots. And a quilt is something that's kind of personal and human. And so I solicited people to make blocks, quilt blocks, and I had a list of the names and of the people who'd been killed through the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. And so when people would tell me that they wanted to make a block, I would assign them a name. They would mail me the block, and then I would turn them into quilts. And then the quilts, I made up some big posters and handouts and resources and stuff. And this became an exhibition that traveled around the country and in a couple of foreign countries. So this is one of the quilts. There were a total of 13 at one time, and the posters that have some information about the facts. Here's some pictures of them on display. This is in New York State House. They were in all kinds of places, at protests and in galleries, peace houses, a bank, all over the place. Here's my list of them. More than 50 since 2012, and I think it's about more than 60 now since I made this slide up. So right now I have 6 quilts in Germany. I think there are 4 or maybe 5 of them in Spokane, and a VFP chapter there has exhibited them all over Washington. I don't know if Kitsap would be interested in hosting it or not, but if you are, you can let me know and we'll see. I had been having trouble finding hosts, and so I have not. The quilts in Germany have been there for some time, and the quilts in Washington have been there for some time. So I'm looking to turn the quilt project over to another group. And that group is this one, Band Killer Drones. This is a very new organization. I'll back up again. No Drones has been around for a while, nodrones.com. And the man who runs this website is named Nick Mottern, M-O-T-T-E-R-N, Nick Mottern. And he and some other prominent anti-drone activists, Kathy Kelly, you may have heard of. She's a saint, has been to Afghanistan dozens of times, has spent time in jail. She's just incredible. David Swanson, who's the executive director of World Beyond War and prolific writer and anti-war activist. Chelsea Faria, who is she was the 22-year-old as a part of the delegation. And Brian Terrell, who spent time in jail.
I'm going to interrupt just a minute. There are some people who didn't mute themselves and they're moving around. I think it's the Newbergs, by the way. And so, because I think I heard your voices, but if you can mute yourself, it'd be good. Anybody else who's moving around and not muted, can you do that? Thanks.
Sure. So this is a new one, the Band Killer Drones website. And the point of this is to try to create a campaign like the No Landmines campaign that Jody Williams, an American, won the Nobel Peace Prize for, and to make this on that kind of level to opposition to the killer drones. So it's relatively new, but on this website, you will find a petition, No More Drone Strikes in Afghanistan, which is the current situation where we're using a lot of drones. Daniel Hale, you may have heard of him. He is a young man who joined the Air Force because he was homeless. I mentioned earlier, people join because they need a job. They need a job or they want the money to go to school. And that's the primary reason both that people join the military. Anyway, he was assigned to work with a drones crew. And he was, I believe he was one of the people that manned the TV screens and made decisions about who would live and die. And he became so ashamed and felt such guilt and horror at his participation in these illegal killings. He turned over some records of that were classified about numbers of people killed by drones. He turned them over to the media and was recently sentenced to 4.5 years in jail. This organization, standwithdanielhale.org, you can find out lots more information about how to help him. But he's a whistleblower. He wrote this letter to the judge before he was sentenced. He pled guilty. He said, yes, I did what I was charged with. I released classified information, which I think was the same charge that General Petraeus had leveled against him too. And you can see what's happened to him. Anyway, Daniel Hill, he wrote this letter. He said, yes, I did what I did. I feel like it's the least I can do, considering my role in the deaths of people. And he's kind of he thinks he should be punished. And so he didn't ask for leniency. He didn't, He didn't, say, oh, I didn't do it, or it wasn't that bad, or whatever. He just said, yes, this is what I did. This is why I did it. And and it was really a moving letter, and you can find the letter on the website, standwithdanielhale.org. Ilhan Omar has recently, just in the last couple of days, written a letter to President Biden asking for a pardon of Daniel Hale. And she points out that he released this information while Obama was still the president, and he was not prosecuted. But then when Trump became the president, then they just had to prosecute him and found him guilty and sentenced him to 4.5 years in jail. Living under drones, this was started, I mean, some time ago, as I mentioned, this was in effect when before we started the convoy and all that stuff. And this bird, this national bird, this movie is really, really good. And Daniel Hale is in this movie, and he talks about his experience. But if you're going to look at anything, you want any more information at all, the top 2 websites would be the ones I would recommend. For more information about how to help, there are other resources, books, movies. You could maybe have a movie night at your fellowship or whatever. There's a lot of other things, though, on these 2 websites. And that concludes my presentation.
I have one here that I was looking up, trying to think that how bad Ambassador Hoagland was.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't seem, his CV doesn't seem that horrible. I couldn't find anything really bad about him. Does he have a bad history otherwise? Because he was for Armenia, he did Armenia thing, he did this, he's been around a lot.
Well, no, Jill, the State Department thinks he's a wonderful guy because he doesn't accept any culpability for the United States. He's toeing the party line. He's a great guy. For the State Department to become an ambassador is the pinnacle of their career. And so he was serving as the deputy ambassador there, and no doubt he's keep moving up. I don't know if he was ever given a full ambassadorship or not, but no, he's not a horrible person compared to, I mean, as far as the United States goes, he's just a horrible person in my mind, So I see this is why we have people like Ann Wright who left the Foreign Service. We have Matt Ho. We have people who left because they could not support the United States foreign policies in good faith. Ann Wright, a colonel, she was 19 years in the Army and many years in fact, she stood up the embassy in Afghanistan. Anyway, she quit the State Department just before we invaded Iraq because she said, I cannot support my country's foreign policy. And so Ambassador Hoagland could, and that's the kind of people they want.
I noticed that one of his things was also America had a long, long time admitting that there was anything wrong in Armenia, that there was a genocide. They didn't want to say that for a long, long time. And I don't know if they have now, but they maybe did because they are not culpable. But they'll let other people. Anybody else want to talk? Bill? Well, I'm thinking about that. I'd love to have more peace exhibits here in our military town. I think it would be really helpful in educating maybe our our Navy people, that there's another side of all this. And I'm thinking about your quilts. We do have a little museum here and maybe there'd be other peace exhibits. You've just made me think about that. That we could do. There's an extra room in the museum downstairs, downtown, which does moving exhibits, temporary exhibits. And I think that might be a nice thing for us to think about for our community.
Well, if you're interested, send me a separate email and I will hook you up with the guys that have the quilts up in Washington State, and I bet we can make something happen.
And let me ask you another question. Are there other kind of peace exhibits that you know about? Or maybe you could text me later, because I just think that would be something that we could do here.
I'm not aware of any. The Eyes Wide Open exhibit stopped many years ago. Actually, it got too big, and the version I saw of it was just Oregon because it got too big. It first started out with just all Americans, and you could see it on that plaza, and it got too big. So then it was states that traveled around, but that stopped some time ago. I'm not aware, but you know what? I would say contact the American Friends Service Committee and tell them that you heard about Eyes Wide Open and you wonder if they have something else, and maybe they would be a good lead, but I'm not aware of anything else right now.
I want to say to the rest of the group, we have all these social justice initiatives, but sometimes it's the wars that are keeping climate change or anything else from happening because we spend so much on them. And I'm disappointed right now. I'm sometimes disappointed because the people who are no missiles, are against nuclear missiles, they don't come to these anti-war in general things. So it really is a problem in motivating people in this town to not support military. It's really a hard thing.
Mm-hmm.
They see the military as their bread and butter,
Mm-hmm.
and they can't see beyond it that they'd have a lot more bread and a lot more butter if they didn't support the military. But that's that.
So
well,
can I? Oh, no, I'm not. I'm just wondering, in Waziristan, where the drones came from. Were they based in Afghanistan primarily?
No, I don't think so. But you see, there's dozens of bases surrounding the area. I don't know. I mean, maybe they did come from Afghanistan. I'm not sure. They could have come from Bagram. I don't know exactly where, but there are lots of choices where they could have come from.
Uh-huh. And do the people operating them come from the bases that the people fly out of, or could they be quite distant?
I think they can be both, but like Creech, they're quite distant. The guys in Creech are operating drones that are being flown in Afghanistan. But you don't have to be far away. You don't have to use the satellite. You can be close as well.
Yeah. Are there any in America that, in the United States, that would be flying these drones that would be, did I miss that part?
No, yes, there are drones in the United States.
No, I meant, are the people who are flying the drones that are in Waziristan, could they be in the United States? The people who are flying them.
Well, the drones that have flown over Waziristan were operated by a crew. It could have been in the United States. I don't know if it was from a lower, more local base or not. I don't know that.
Okay.
But I think now, well, Creech is still doing drones. In fact, there's been an annual protest at Creech Air Force Base. It's coming up in September. There's several days that they have protests in front of the gate. And the woman who coordinates that, her name is Toby Blomé. She is a member of Code Pink, and she was also part of the delegation. And every year she's organized this big protest down at Creech. And Hancock, Hancock, New York was converted to be a drone base. And that has a good number of protesters there too that were part of the delegation. But people see, Congress loves drones because they don't, Americans aren't killed. And that's the only thing that matters to this country. The money's not a problem, as we're spending $1 trillion a year on war, nothing on, now we've got a hurricane coming into New Orleans. It's already a hospital full of COVID people, but we don't put money into, hospitals and medicine and all this stuff. Now it's got to go into bombs. It's crazy. I don't know why everybody is just not in the street just livid about it, but it's our culture. We just don't even think about it. And even now, you wanted me to talk about Afghanistan, maybe. Right now, we're seeing everybody piling on to Biden about how he screwed up the withdrawal. And I agree. I mean, it looks like there was no plan at all. It's horrid. I mean, I saw, people falling off the outside of fuselages. I saw a baby being handed hand over hand to the front of a crowd. breaks your heart. But this was perfectly foreseeable. The whole war is foreseeable, what's going to happen. And for people to just say, oh, we didn't know this would happen, who could have known? Well, it's obvious that they could have known. And this is but nobody now, my point I was getting to is nobody's interviewing people who said, no, this war shouldn't happen in the first place. You can't go on CNN, any news station, mainstream media, and see an interview with somebody saying, this was a problem from the beginning, and this is what happens in war. People die. And and before it happened too, before we went into Afghanistan, was right after 9/11. Nobody wanted to interview somebody that said, no, not such a good idea. And as you know, Barbara Lee is the only congressman who voted against it. So, nobody seems to care about why we went in or the damage. And now all you hear about are American fatalities, those 13 men and women. That's a big deal. And now we know that one of them was a Boy Scout, and one of them really loved his sister and met her at the bus stop, and all these human things we're finding out about the 13 people, Americans, who died. We don't know anything about the thousands of Afghans who not only have we killed, but we've grossly injured them. We've made millions of refugees. Can you imagine? American can't imagine leaving their home and their business and all of their belongings and fleeing to a country where they don't speak the language and they have no means of employment. Nobody talks about that. And I'm sorry 13 Americans died, but they shouldn't have been there in the first place. Our country shouldn't be people in any other country. And we should expect that they want us out, and that they're going to use force to get us out. It's so stupid, that wars, and then wonder why did they hate us? Why did we have enemies? I'm on my soapbox now. I'm on a roll. Hi, Ellie.
Yeah, I came very, very late because I was with the coffee hour. And so I missed your presentation, I'm afraid. But what you're just now saying reminds me so much of the late 60s, where there was massive protest because of the draft. I think that makes a huge difference in the way the US perceives our activities abroad. When our young people are subject to draft, they care, our parents care, people care more.
Mm-hmm.
We have essentially assigned this task of foreign intervention to kind of a mercenary class, essentially, and it's off of our own radar screens as a result. And the irony of this is, when during the late 60s, when my kids were little, I very much supported getting rid of the draft, because I didn't want to see them. I had two boys. I didn't want to see them drafted. But now I see the result of that, which is
so you do support the draft now?
Actually, I would support a draft. Actually, what I support is a national service for everybody, every young.
Okay. All right. Well, there's two different topics in my mind right now. And you probably don't know anything about this, but right now it is seriously possible that the Congress is going to pass a law requiring women to register for the selective service. Nobody knows about it. It's happening though in the back channels. It doesn't make sense to me to say you want to raise opposition to war by forcing people to go to war. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think we have to abolish the draft, and so to force people, and as you know, some people, if you have connections or you have money, you don't have to go. You can always get out of that. So the draft is unfair. The draft is, now we have what we call a poverty draft, because as I mentioned, people join because they, and you mentioned mercenaries. The DOD, out of that $1 trillion, we're paying a lot of money to private corporations who are making a gajillion dollars, and they make a whole lot more than the soldiers do who get killed. And this causes a lot of resentment on that part. But to me, Ellie, it doesn't make sense to say, oh, well, if more Americans died through a draft, then we would care about it. So, that doesn't.
I,
that
I
doesn't-
agree with you, which is why I opposed the draft in the first place. But what had happened was then war becomes secondary. We don't care about it. We don't think about it. It's off our radar screens.
Mhm.
And that's
You're
the
right. You're right, but it's a sad, sad comment that if you're right. In other words, it's almost like two wrongs making a,
Yeah, I agree. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody drafted. I don't want anybody going to war. But look what happened as a result. We let these wars go on and nobody.
Yeah, but look how long it took us to get out of Vietnam. How
Yeah.
many years did it take us in the streets with a draft to get out of there?
Right.
I think the United States, they get too much invested in it. They said, well, we can't get out now because then we'd look like we were wrong, to go in. And then all those deaths would be for nothing. Well, they're always for nothing. But, this is part of it's a pride. It's a thing the United States wants other countries to be afraid of us rather than to like us. And I don't get that kind of mentality, but that's it. I travel a good bit, and I went to Russia a couple of years ago, and I asked these people, more than one, I said, what are the enemy countries of Russia? And nobody would tell me that there were any. They said, no, we don't have any enemies. We want to be friends with everybody. And this is just a civilian telling me this. Now, you ask an American, who are the enemy countries? Well, they'll rattle them off. Well, we got Afghanistan, and we got North Korea and Russia and China and Iran, of course. And, this is we think of ourselves as having enemies, and we have to defend ourselves or attack these enemies before they get us. While other countries, they don't have, you ask somebody in
Finland.
any other kind. Yeah, ask them, who are your enemies? I said, well, they don't have any enemies. Why would somebody want to attack us? Why? We haven't done anything wrong to them. So
what about the money? I
The
think
money.
it's always the money is because they are, in fact, that's what Eisenhower said a long, long time ago. That just because it costs a lot to arm a thing and people are making like $1 zillion, making it. And so money is the only thing that goes. So
well, you'd think. I don't think it's even enough, though. I think it has to be American lives. I think the only way that we're going to stop war is through, I shouldn't say the only way. The only thing the United States responds to is American deaths or money, economic pressures. And this is what gets me. The money, not only on what we could have spent the money on, but the fact that it's so much of what we are, so our priorities look like. Our priorities are military and war. This is a statistic that I love to tell people because it really, you can understand it. According to the United Nations, world hunger could be ended with 3 billion with a B dollars. 3 billion. That's 3% of our military budget. Can you imagine how the rest of the world would perceive the United States if we ended world hunger instead of bombing them or calling them enemies? What could we have done now? And now, now we're going to send money into KBR and Halliburton are going to rebuild Afghanistan because we got to help those people that we've, So that now the corporations will make more money off of war. Instead of
whatever they bomb, they can build up again. Though, I'm going to say one more thing, is that I think you could also by changing the, that's not me, by changing people's minds. I'll just think about this, where a big profound change in how people view gay, lesbian, trans people has occurred during my lifetime. And that has happened sort of like step by step by step. I think there has been a profound change, and I don't know how it would happen, but it was a lot of education and a lot of just soft, what do they call, softly not killing people to make them change, but educating people to make them change. And maybe this, step by step, we could start educating people that there's other ways.
That's one of the main arguments I use, or not argument, that's one of the examples I use when I give my pitch about World Beyond War and how we can end war. It's possible. And that's one of the examples in our lifetimes. We can really see that. Slavery is the most obvious example, that we abolished something that was considered perfectly normal and accepted, and now is considered reprehensible and repugnant. So yes, I see that as an example of how societal values change, and I see that seems like the rest of the world with the nuke treaty that the rest of the world has passed are starting to coalesce around this feeling of not wanting war, not wanting to endanger the planet. And so I think it will take some time. I agree with you, but it's so incrementally slow that it gets very discouraging, and it's hard work, but you're right. And I think education, which is a big sector of what World Beyond War does, is education. And we just have to keep plodding, we have to keep plodding along. And what else can you do? Well,
thank you again very much, Leah.
Sure.
It's given us a lot to think about. And I'm going to bring some of your ideas to our Social Justice Committee too. I think
Okay.
that we can do more of it. Thank
All
you
right.
again.
My
So I
pleasure.
think I'll put the meeting off now.
Okay.
Maybe you have to do it, Leah. You can put it down.
Oh,
You might have to leave
all right. Okay, I'll end the meeting. Thank you, folks.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
So generous with your time.
Good.